Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, a podcast that aims to address divorce, separation and co-parenting here in the UK, countering the often sensationalist way it's portrayed in the media, challenging the status quo and driving for reform. On each episode, I'm joined by experts to discuss divorce, separation and co-parenting from different angles and to give their opinions and to debate them. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor and divorce coach, co-founder of Amicable and host of the Divorce Podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Dan Betts, the breaking dad. Dan is 31 years old and he's from Hampshire, a co-parent to his beautiful 4-year-old daughter, Evie. Evie's mum and Dan separated just over 2 years ago when she was 2 and have since been navigating the ups and downs of co-parenting life, which, as we know, can be very tough. Dan started to share their journey together on social media in an honest, no frills and candid way to show other co-parents who are struggling with parental separation that they aren't alone. He's now a substantial online following and is known as the Breaking Dad. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, how are you doing? All right.
I'm good, thank you. Good. So, Dan, let's start by talking about this moniker you have, the Breaking Dad. What was breaking about being a dad?
So, I mean, to start with, it was a play on words, so play on the Breaking Bad, as you might have noticed. But it felt really relevant to me because the process of separation I found incredibly difficult. So for my whole life, I've been building up towards, establishing a family unit, that typical life of buy a house, have kids and all that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden, all of that was up in the air and I wasn't living with my daughter anymore. I found myself sinking into quite a deep depression and it just didn't see the point. I said, what is this all for? I'm never going to have my daughter in the way that I was used to, giving her a kiss goodnight every night, reading her a story before bed every evening. All of that stuff, just suddenly everything I'd always wanted wasn't there anymore. So really, I started the Instagram as a bit of an outlet originally to channel my focus and put it into something a little bit more positive than what I had been doing, which was really just a lot of that time was around, I'd find myself often just sitting at home, not wanting to talk to anyone, not wanting to see my friends, not wanting to see family, because it meant I had to talk about how I was feeling and I was really struggling with that. So it almost became a bit of a journal and it made me accountable to my daughter, which is the reason why I started it. It's just sharing our experience together and also to share what the experience is like for dads, because it's not an easy process to go through for dads. It's well documented how hard separation is for mums, and there's a lot of dads that don't do the right thing. But then what about the dads who do want to do the right thing? There's a lot of red tape and challenges there. So I wanted to share that journey basically, and that's how the name was born.
So it sounds like that it was quite a public thing to sort of put out your feelings there on Instagram and all the rest of it, and some quite difficult feelings you were struggling with at the time. What was the thinking behind going so public with it?
Do you know, it's a really interesting one. I had an Instagram account, a personal Instagram account for a long time, and I'd always shared lots of pictures of what I'd been up to with Evie. And I'd ummed and ahed for ages. I work in marketing myself, so I work a lot on social media platforms and across the whole kind of ether of marketing. But I'd ummed and ahed about doing a public account because I'd seen lots of public parenting accounts and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I was worried about all of the data protection stuff. I was wondering, is it safe? All of these sort of things. Then I thought one day I'm just going to bite the bullet and start a public account and see what happens. And over time, although the name was born and it was obvious what the message was, that wasn't really, I would say, the niche to begin with. It very much evolved from that name into the account that it became, which was about separated parenting. It was supposed to share what being a good dad looks like. That was it, and just my mission to be a good parent to my daughter. And then I found very quickly on it gained traction because it was nice. It was nice for mums to see a dad that was taking an interest because it's very dominated by mums. The platform, there's not many dads that do it, but also to hear another perspective. So I got a lot of messages, particularly early on, saying how nice it was to hear it from a man's point of view, because a lot of mums are having conversations about what's going on, but they don't realise the impact that some of those conversations could have on the dad as well. There's one story in particular which really I'll always remember, actually, I got a message from someone who'd read some of the stuff that I was going through, and she'd realised an impact it was having on her ex. And she realised some of the errors of her ways, and they ended up getting back together, which I thought was really lovely.
Yeah.
Just from seeing a different perspective and thinking, actually, I can see where he's coming from.
Yeah. And do you have a lot of dads follow you now then? Is it, because I know you've got thousands and thousands of followers, haven't you? But do you know the balance between men and women? Is it dads looking to connect or?
No, it's still, well, I'd love for there to be more dads on a platform. It's about 86% mums. So it's a very small percentage of dads, but it's a very tight-knit little group of dads. And, there's quite a few parents that I speak to. The people I speak to most probably are a very small number of dads that we've got quite a nice little bond going as a consequence. But it's majority mums because of the nature of Instagram.
Yeah. And why? So I'm and I about how to ask this in not a provocative way. Why do you think people follow you? Because you're not claiming to be an expert, so you're not putting out expert advice. So what is it that makes people follow you? What do you think it is about what you put out there and say that makes it appealing and helpful to people?
For me, it's about honesty, and it's always been about honesty. So there's this thing with Instagram, especially as a social media channel, where people share their beautiful homes, the aspirational lives, the beautiful holidays and the nice fancy cars, that we're all supposed to look at that and aspire to have it. And it makes us feel bad about ourselves when we don't have it. My job as a marketer is to show people, or anyone's job as a marketer, to show people a life that they could aspire to have, which is why you need to get that product, right? So when I look at Instagram, I think, well, why do we need to talk like that? Why do people need to talk in terms of what you haven't got and why your life isn't good enough, when you could use a platform to talk about exactly what your life is and what's not, what you can improve? Fine. I talk about things like, I have certainly talked about in the past things that I'd like to improve about how my relationship with my ex was, for example, how I would have liked that to have been a little bit easier. But the majority of the time, it wasn't about that. It was about facing into a challenge and saying, look, this is where my life is now. It's not ideal, but this is what I'm grateful for. This is how I'm bringing up my daughter now, and this is what I want for her in the future. And it was just very honest and saying, you don't need to aspire to have these unattainable goals, because life right now was good enough. And that was a big turning point for me in the separation, was realizing that I'd spent my whole life aspiring to get up the career ladder, probably at the detriment of my relationship with my daughter's mum. And I learned a lot about what was important from life, and actually it's being grateful for what you've got instead of what you wish you had.
Yeah. So it's the honesty that you think, that draws people in. And then just going back to that, what you were saying there about, there were some things that you kind of wish you'd done differently in the hard times. When you were separating, what was it that enabled you to, do you think, to get to a place where you can co-parent and you can have this wonderful relationship with your daughter? What made the difference, I suppose?
So, the relationship with Evie was always there. So I've always been very, very, she's like a little mini me. So we've always been very, very close. And I think because my daughter's mum worked every other weekend, my daughter and I were used to having a lot of time together, which made the transition much easier. I think building a co-parenting relationship, the number one thing there is patience, because it got very fractious. It was very, very difficult when we first separated. Couldn't talk to each other. It was only via email at one point, and it was very, very difficult to arrange anything, because I'm sure she had her perception of what I was behaving like. Every time I felt like I was trying to suggest something, it would get disagreed with, just purely, what I felt like was just purely because I'd suggested it. So nothing we did seemed to move anything forward. And there were certain points within that 12 months after the first 12 months after the separation, I thought there's no way we're ever going to move things forward because we can't communicate.
So that's just really important. I just want to pause a second there, because that's so important, isn't it? Just to acknowledge that for so many people, that first 12 months is pretty rubbish. And you can feel like you're never going to get onto a platform where you can, or a place where you can co-parent. But actually what you're saying is you had to just be patient and work through that bit. And by the sounds of it, it does get better. So I just want to really reiterate that, because It's so hard when you're in that first 12 months, isn't it? And everything.
Do you know what? That's the main conversation I have these days, is now that life has sort of moved forward a lot since those times. I remember everybody saying to me, you know, I'm in floods of tears to my mum all the time, just thinking there's no way that this is ever going to get better. And she goes, I know, you know, I hate seeing you suffer like this. And she always say the same thing, you know, it does get better, it just needs time. You know, time is a healer. And you always think, well, it's so cliche. That's the last thing you want to hear when you're in the midst of all that, is because you don't want to wait for it to get better. You want it to be better, you know. But it's absolutely true. You know, the more that time passes, the less the emotions, sort of the emotions take less of a hold over time. And then soon you can start to establish, you know, what is as close to a friendship as you can imagine. You know,
it sounds like your mum was really important in terms of supporting you through this. Do you think it's important to have somebody that can walk alongside you without getting too involved or too judgy of the other person or what have you?
Yeah. So one of the things that I really struggled with is I suppose inherently I'm probably quite a competitive person. And what I'd seen initially, or what I'd felt initially from the separation, was that I'd failed my daughter. I'd failed my relationship because, you know, my daughter's mum had walked out. So sure, if she was going to walk out, then I'd done something wrong. You know, it wasn't good enough. So I really beat myself up about it. And because of that competitiveness, I didn't want to talk to any of my friends about it, because that was almost like an admission of guilt. That was, you know, it was really hitting the nail on the head as to why we'd separated, and we'd start delving into detail. And I didn't want to do that. My mum was probably the only person that I felt like I could do that with. She's been through separation herself. You know, I was brought up within a co-parenting family. I've got an amazing stepdad who, you know, is a kind of very, very key supporting figure in my life. And I think had I not had her to have those conversations, things would have gotten to they did get to a very dark place, that thankfully she was there to help me through that.
And so when you were sort of trying to get like a co-parenting relationship established, how did you come up with the care pattern for Evie and all the logistics around who was going to have Christmases and birthdays, and what sort of process did you go through to get all of that established?
To be honest, at the beginning, it was an absolute nightmare. So the biggest challenge that we had was that from my side, I knew that I had parental responsibility, so I knew I had rights. From her side, I think her perception of what my rights were very different. So at the very beginning, it was very dictatorial. It was, you will have her every other weekend. You will see her when I say, and these are my terms, which I didn't agree with. So we would go back and forth via email initially. Things would gradually escalate. And at the very beginning, I think it's quite common that it sort of escalates to a point of breaking point, and then we couldn't communicate at all. So we got to that point where we just could not even have a conversation. So then we decided that we get solicitors involved, exchanged a few very expensive solicitors' letters and achieved not very much, and got pointed in the direction of, because the first thing you say is, right, I'll take you to court. That's what everyone says, you know, either way. It's like, well, we'll go to court. But no one realizes the actual cost of that. And I was in the situation where I'd taken on, my daughter's mum had moved out, left me with the entire house to pay for all of this stuff. I was suddenly I was building up debt, you know, very quickly, because I couldn't afford the lifestyle that we'd had. And then solicitors' letters thrown into the fold, and it's thinking it's ramping up. And the solicitor said to me, look, mediation is the way forward. So we booked mediation session. And at that point, communication was so fractious that we didn't even have face-to-face mediation. We had shuttle mediation. And eventually, I think what I loved about that was that a mediator gives you cold, hard facts. You know, it's you can do that, but you shouldn't. You know, you can argue it, but why would you? You know, and there was a situation where I remember the mediator saying to me, you know, I really feel for you. You know, what the way that they're behaving in this instance is not good. But what you've done is not good, you know, in terms of the way you've responded. You know, your emails are emotionally charged. You're not talking like a professional. You know, you should approach communication in a professional sense, like it's a colleague, not an ex. So what it was a real kind of a bit of humble pie to swallow, really, where you had to go, oh, look, okay, they were in the wrong, but then I've not helped myself there, so we need to do this better. And that's that. Through the mediator, we put a parenting plan in place. We agreed things like Christmases, Father's Days, Mother's Days, all of those key kind of birthdays, all that sort of stuff. And that parenting plan was absolutely crucial to setting a bit of a routine that couldn't be swayed on the first sniff of an argument.
So it sounds like just having that, well, not just, but having that third party, that other person to try and help you reflect on your own, what you can control, the stuff you can do. Because you're right, if someone's being unreasonable, there's not a lot you can do about that behavior, but you do have the choice about how to respond. And it feels like to me what you're saying is getting a grip of your responses rather than just reacting to things was absolutely critical in then enabling a dialogue to open up around a parenting plan.
Well, yeah, exactly that. I know, like I said, I alluded to about the competitive nature. I think when someone raises an argument against you and says, well, you've done this, you've done that, you've done this. Well, I'd be like, whoa, no, I haven't. Well, you've done that and you've done this and you've done that. And I'd reply to every single point, in a way that I thought was at the time me being clever, because I'm saying, well, hold on a minute, but you've said this, but you're wrong because of that. Actually, it was petulant, and looking back, it wasn't solving a problem. It was, if anything, the phrase that really stood out to me was about polarization. It was the solicitor said it to me initially, and the mediator said it as well. She said, "Look, don't get dragged into these arguments because it doesn't achieve what you're trying to achieve. All it does is polarize both sides," and that is a really important point.
And at that point, did you know what you wanted to achieve? So, did you have in your mind a clear kind of plan of how you wanted to co-parent, or did that evolve as you sort of went through these negotiations?
To be completely honest, I didn't know what co-parenting was. I didn't know what people use the phrase co-parenting, and it's such a common phrase in my day-to-day language now. But I didn't know what co-parenting was. I knew that I wanted as much time with my daughter as possible, as close to 50% as I could. But I also knew that in order to work a full-time job, that going for full 50% was not the best thing for my daughter. It was not in her best interests for me to do that, because it would mean childcare and it would mean things like that. And I at that point, I didn't really understand what a solid co-parenting relationship would look like. I just knew that I wanted to be with my daughter as much as possible, and likewise, that's exactly how my ex was behaving as well. She wanted her daughter with her as much as possible.
Was the number element of it important? So you said there you wanted her 50% of the time. Is that what you meant? Or were you actually trying to say you just wanted a meaningful relationship? Or was actually at that point 50% quite a big thing in your mind? Because I get this a lot. People come with a number. I want at least 50%.
Yeah. Do you know what it is? I think that a lot of people look at it, and I think this goes for mums and dads, but whoever would be paying maintenance looks at it as, I want half. Because I can look after them half, and I don't want to pay you to raise my child, and that's what it felt like at the time, and then because I wanted to be there for her as much as she was, and the reality was that and this is something that I've come to terms with since that, is that the money is so inconsequential. I'm quite happy to pay my maintenance money. She gets across bang on time every month, no questions asked, because actually the reality was, what was best for Evie at the time was for me to have her a bit less than 50%, because it puts less of a strain on her and it gives her a better timetable that suits her much more.
But how did you come to that realization? What had to happen for you to work that out then? Because that doesn't sound like that's where you started.
No, that came through the conversation. It evolved. So it was like a negotiation process. I wanted, she wanted every other weekend. I didn't think that was enough. I wanted 50%. She thought that was too much. And then we sort of batted timetables together. The mediator helped us to see what was reasonable, what was achievable, and also was quite a sobering kind of point of contact, really, to be able to say to you, do you think you can really do that? Do you think it's viable for you to do that? Or are you going to put too much strain on yourself? What's the right thing for you to do to make sure that you're putting your child first? And ultimately that's what we all wanted, and that's how we arrived at the timetable, which works out, I think it works out 40, just over 40%. So it's not like it's far off half. I think if I had a 1 day extra every other week, it would count as 50-50. So, for the sake of a bit of money and a timetable that works for everyone, it just seems like the right thing.
And that's a shared care agreement, isn't it? You share the care of Evie. You're both parents. You both have homes that support her. And, there isn't someone who's primary and secondary. It sounds like a very balanced relationship, irrespective of what the actual nitty-gritty percentage of the time is. And I think that's what you're trying to get to ultimately, isn't it? It sounds like you had to be incredibly persistent.
Yeah. There was a lot, it was a lot of pushing. There were a lot of difficult conversations that had to be had, difficult emails that had to be had. It got to a point where we followed the court route. I was prepared to go to court to argue it because I knew that I wanted to have my daughter more than what had been offered. Communication channels completely broke down. So I wasn't even getting responses to emails at one point. And until I took the route of going to see a mediator on my own, because mediation was refused, they signed I think it's called the C100. I forget now, it's been a while since I did that, but signed a particular form that needed to make the application to the courts. That sort of kick-started the process. And interestingly, actually, we had all of that in place and it all sort of loosely worked, and then it started to fall apart again after about 6 months of that. And then when COVID hit last year and everybody went into lockdown, that's when things suddenly saw a massive positive change. It's almost like everybody's reflected over it and, we're all at home thinking a little bit more. And suddenly that's when we started rebuilding our sort of parenting relationship, bizarrely.
So at the point where you both, I guess, needed each other a bit more because of COVID and needed to make sure that Evie was seeing both of you, that's when you started to be able to communicate better. That's so interesting. I had a similar experience. My co-parenting relationship definitely improved when COVID hit. And I don't know why that should be. I can't quite work that out. It's something about needing to be more thoughtful and planned about it because it was harder to do it, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
that suddenly
I almost think there's an element of suddenly you realise that everything's not permanent. All of these routines that we'd had, I was going to and from the office every day. I was doing all of this stuff just almost on autopilot because I've done it for years. And then suddenly when you're at home, you have to think about what's important. And COVID is a serious illness. My sister's currently going through a bout of COVID. She's only 22 now. And she's just about to get her vaccine and she's just got COVID for the first time. And it's she's really been taken out by it. And I think that was all of that uncertainty about what that meant for the country, at that, it's easy to reflect now and it already seems less serious than it did at the time. But nobody knew what the future looked like. Nobody knew what was going to happen to the economy and all of this stuff. Just everything was up in the air. And it was a great time to reevaluate and think about what's really important. And actually, retrospectively, we shifted our timetable based on, because she had been furloughed and I hadn't. We shifted the timetable. So I'd have Evie every weekend from Friday to Monday for that time, first sort of 3 months of the pandemic. And I'll look back on that probably as the fondest 3 months I've ever had with my daughter. We had the best time because it forced us to stay at home, find things to do because we couldn't go out, and explore, around us and the woods and the fields around us and go on little adventures. And it's not devaluing in any, I know, I appreciate a lot of people had a horrible time, but from our little closed circuit of life, it was like a lovely little bubble to be in,
It sounds lovely. It sounds like you had a real chance to connect as parent and child, which is amazing. I'm conscious we've just had Father's Day. What was Father's Day like as a single dad?
Oh, the first Father's Day was very it was horrible. It was a difficult one. It was very emotional to, funnily enough, I've still got the Father's Day thing she made for me at preschool on the wall in my kitchen, which has been there. I was thinking the other day, it's been sat there couple of years now, but I just love looking at it. It's got a little handprint and a little picture in a picture of a rocket. But yeah, it was, again, that's one of those, the first time for all of those key kind of dates, first birthday, her first birthday after the separation, Christmas, Father's Day, all of those were really, really difficult. Once you get those first ones sort of ticked off the list and you sort of realize it's not as bad as you think it's going to be, things start to get a bit easier, but it was difficult.
What would you say to somebody who's like approaching that, or who's just gone through the first Father's Day and it's been awful? What helps?
I always describe it the same way. It's like trudging through mud. It's always, walking through really thick mud. You just have to keep going. And it doesn't feel like, you feel exhausted and you feel like there's no point sometimes. And I certainly felt like that in the run up towards the first Christmas in particular. I really, really struggled with it. I think first Father's Day, it had only been a couple of months since the separation, so it was all still a bit up in the air. First Christmas was the time it hit the hardest because I just could not see a light at the end of the tunnel,
It sounds tricky. What are the other kind of key milestones, do you think, when you're going through a co-parenting relationship? What are the other things to watch out for?
I think the crucial, in terms of milestones, in terms of your relationship with the other parent, it's getting a structure in place, you need a defined plan as to how you're going to approach parenting, and you need a defined method of communication that works for everybody. And the key milestone for me in that is being able to strip out your emotions and your relationship. If you're close enough with someone to have a child with them, you're probably quite, emotionally tied with them. So then trying to take that aspect out of it and talk to them like a business colleague and, in very short, sharp professional language, it's really tough because you've got all these beautiful memories. I was there, obviously the two of us shared the birth of our daughter, it's such a significant moment in my life. Yet now that person is practically a stranger to me in terms of there's an exchange that happens. We have a very base level communication, but that's it, and it's all around Evie. So that's in the parenting aspect. In terms of key milestones as a father after separation or as a parent after separation, I think it's the first on those significant days. So whether it's Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, birthdays, their birthdays, birthdays are really tough. I remember having to pick my daughter up on her first birthday after we separated, and my ex was refusing to see me or do the handover with me directly. So he took my stepdad with me and they did the handover. I sat in the car and I'm right next to it as the exchange is happening. Evie was crying her eyes out because she was a bit uncomfortable going to my stepdad because she's 2 years old and she only wanted mummy or daddy. And I sat there absolutely helpless, not able to do anything. And that was probably the most gut-wrenching experience because all I wanted to do was console my daughter and I wasn't able to, So that was a tough time.
But it sounds like your advice from before about just having to trudge through the mud and carry on. It sounds like that's the only thing you can say to people at that stage, that there are going to be really horrible moments. And I've had quite a few myself. And you just sometimes want to put your head in your hands and scream, don't you? Because it's so frustrating when you feel so powerless and helpless to do anything.
Yeah. And I think the biggest consolation prize that I can say to anyone going through that is once you get through it and you look back and you see that you made it through, it's this massive feeling of success, a huge sense of achievement that you've managed to weather that storm. I feel like that now. I feel like I look back at that time that was incredibly difficult and came out probably a much better parent because of it, because I appreciate the value of my time with my child infinitely more.
And it sounds like things have moved on for you. You've got a new partner?
Yeah, new partner, Rosie. We've been together a year. And
so what was it like introducing a new partner into the whole co-parenting mix then?
It was really weird, actually. It's a really nerve-wracking time. I mean, she's got 2 children herself, Tilly and Liza, so they're 2 and 6 now. And it was a real unusual time because when you'd ordinarily start up a relationship, you're only really thinking about, before children, you're thinking about each other, and there's no consequence to if it ends, you move on. And when you're meeting somebody else and you're considering dating, you need to think about, is this person right? Could I see this person being a parent figure, a guardian figure to them? Do I have that relationship with them that I'd want? Do I see a future with them? Everything seems so much more substantial when you've got children involved. So we took that process incredibly slowly. So funnily enough, as part of our parenting plan, Evie's mum and I had agreed that if we were to start dating, it'd be a minimum of 3 months before an introduction with children, because we just felt like we needed to put that measure in place, so the children didn't have to go through, Evie wouldn't go through any kind of confused someone coming in, someone
here's
going.
Another person. Here's another one. No, they're going away. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were really worried about that. So I must admit, I wanted to take things very, very slowly. And I introduced Evie just after 3 months. We had a little day out together, but it was very much as this is Daddy's friend. Didn't try to force anything, in terms of Rosie just took a back seat and let us have a usual day together. And she was just there. And then we didn't see each other again for another couple of months because we just kept it nice and casual, as in Evie didn't see Rosie for another couple of months, and we introduced the kids together around 3 or 4 months after that. So about 6 or 7 months before we really, brought everyone together. And we're very conscious we wanted to do it in neutral locations. So it wasn't going to be at my house. It wasn't going to be at their house. So we went out, funnily enough, we went pumpkin picking for our first little day out together, which was lovely. And I mean, amazingly, they've just been best friends since they met. All of these kids, the kids absolutely adore each other. Liza, who's 2, gets so excited to see Evie. It's lovely. It's really nice.
It sounds like it was the parenting, having it in the parenting plan. So having had the discussion with Evie's mum already, that had then laid the groundwork for you to be able to focus on what was right for you and your new blended family, rather than having to constantly worry about renegotiating with Evie's mum. Is that fair enough? Or
yeah, 100%. And one of the things about reestablishing that parenting relationship, it's sort of like that professional relationship, was that we'd outlined that time frame. And also I took it, like I say, very carefully. So I said to Evie's mum, I'm thinking of introducing her soon to my new partner. How do you feel about that? And, she was absolutely fine. She said, hey, no worries at all. And I think part of that is having that open and honest communication first, because if I'd have just said, I've introduced Evie to my new partner, she might have felt a little bit defensive. But I think the reality, being involved in that decision-making process, or at least informed, rather than, it wasn't an ask permission, it was this is what I'm going to do, but I just wanted to let you know. It's like a courtesy thing more than do you mind if I do this? And that's a very important balance to get right. But I think it helps a lot in terms
That's exactly it, isn't it? It's that balance between, you don't need your partner's permission, but out of courtesy, you should discuss it with them beforehand, isn't it? And that's the balance, so that no one's in a place of kind of dictating, or you don't have to get, as you were saying, to that place of polarizing. Well, you can't stop me. Well, yes, I can. That's exactly the right tone, isn't it? So it's I'm letting you know this is something I'm going to do. I'm not asking permission. I'm letting you know, and I'm receptive to any feedback you might have about that.
Yeah. And that's 100% it. It's about, talk to me if you've got any concerns, if there's anything you want to know. I was fully expecting who is she? What does she do? Tell me about her life, just because she might want to know. But, the reality was she was quite happy because Evie tells her everything anyway.
Listen, I could talk forever, but we are coming to the end of time. Dan, thanks so much for joining me today on the podcast. Where can people find out more about you?
So on Instagram, I'm at @the_breaking_dad, or you can see my blog, which I need to update more often, actually, thebreakingdad.co.uk.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you. You can find out more about me. I'm Kate_Daly on Twitter. And you can also subscribe to the podcast at thedivorcepodcast.com. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks a lot.